Hey, so tonight we're going to peel back the gilded curtains and look at a side of royalty you rarely see in the fairy tales. Forget the grand balls and perfect portraits. We're stepping into the shadows of Europe's most powerful queens, women who wielded immense influence but were, in private, utterly consumed by a force far stronger than any political adversary: addiction. You think your daily caffeine fix is rough? Imagine a craving that could dismantle an empire or shatter a queen's sanity, all while the world watched. Before we delve into the potent grip of opium, alcohol, and secret concoctions that shaped their reign, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let me know your location and time in the comments below. Alright, find that cozy spot, pull your blanket up high, and let the whispers of history carry you back. You drift back through the centuries, past the glowing screens and humming refrigerators of your modern life, to a world where darkness was truly dark and silence was profound, broken only by the crackle of a distant fire or the rustle of heavy tapestries. Imagine you are there, a silent observer in a grand yet frigid stone castle somewhere in the heart of 17th century Europe. You're not in a warm, insulated room with central heating. No, you feel the persistent chill that seeped into the very bones of the building, a dampness that clung to every fabric and made even the thickest furs feel inadequate. Outside, the wind howls a mournful dirge, rattling leaded windows, each pane of glass imperfect, distorting the world outside into a watery blur. There's no soft glow from a bedside lamp, just the flicker of tallow candles, casting dancing shadows that stretch and shrink, making familiar objects seem monstrous in the dim light. The air, you notice, is thick with the scent of wood smoke, old parchment, and something else, a faint, sweet, cloying aroma that you can't quite place, but which seems to permeate everything. This is the world into which your queen is born, a world of immense power and crushing vulnerability, where the line between medicine and poison was often blurred, and the seeds of addiction were sown long before she ever understood their devastating harvest. You are witnessing the birth, or perhaps just the early days, of a future monarch, a tiny bundle of royal potential wrapped in layers of exquisite yet scratchy linen. This child, destined for a crown, is already being shaped by the harsh realities of her era. Infant mortality is rampant. Half of all children won't see their 5th birthday. Every cough, every fever, every unexplained crying fit is a source of terror for her parents, the reigning king and queen, whose legacy and dynasty hinge upon this fragile life. You watch as a nervous procession of physicians and wet nurses hover, their faces grim under the heavy wigs and starched ruffs. They offer advice, often contradictory, and remedies that would shock your modern sensibilities. You see the Queen Mother, her face pale and drawn from childbirth, succumbing to a tonic offered by her personal physician, a dark, viscous liquid in an ornate glass bottle. You recognize the faint, sweet smell from earlier. It's opium disguised as a comforting draught, a potent painkiller and sedative, given freely to ease the myriad discomforts of court life. The chronic aches, the nervous tension, the crushing boredom, the despair of loss. For her, it's a temporary escape from the pressures of producing an heir, from the constant scrutiny of her court. Now shift your gaze to the infant queen herself. You might imagine a modern nursery, pristine and filled with gentle toys. Forget that. Her cradle is a richly carved wooden box draped with heavy velvet, but beneath the finery it's still just a small, confined space in a large, cold room. The air she breathes is far from fresh, a mixture of the castle's dampness, the lingering smoke from the hearth, and the faint, sweet scent of the Queen Mother's opium-laced medicine, which even permeates the breast milk for those who choose to suckle their own children while under its influence. As a child, you might have been given a pacifier, perhaps a soothing lullaby or a warm bottle. Our future queen, however, is part of a different tradition. When she cries, as all infants do in a world without gentle, effective remedies for colic or teething pain, you see a nurse approach with a small linen-wrapped cloth dipped in a liquid that smells faintly of that same sweet, cloying essence. It's often called Godfrey's cordial or Mother's blessing, but its active ingredient is, again, opium, or perhaps a potent alcohol-based sedative. This isn't malicious. It's considered good care, a way to quiet a fussy child, to ensure the infant, and by extension the royal household, gets some much-needed rest. You watch as the child, after a few moments of suckling this narcotic-laced cloth, slowly succumbs to a heavy, unnatural slumber, her tiny chest rising and falling with an almost too deep rhythm. You realize this is where it begins, not as a conscious choice, not as a moral failing, but as an insidious infiltration from the very first moments of life. The pain of teething, the discomfort of childhood ailments, the anxiety of a mother, all are soothed not by gentle care and modern medicine, but by potent substances that warp the mind and body. You observe the young princess growing, still surrounded by this medicinal landscape. A minor cough might warrant a syrup laced with laudanum, an opium tincture. A restless night might be met with another sedative. The concept of addiction, as you understand it today, barely exists. These substances are seen as gifts from God, divine remedies for mortal suffering. The irony, you note with a pang, is that the very tools meant to protect and preserve her precious royal life are simultaneously laying the groundwork for a lifelong battle, a silent, internal war that will rage beneath the glittering surface of her queenship. You feel the weight of this historical reality, the cruel twist of fate that places a child destined for absolute power on a path paved with unconscious dependency from the moment her first cry echoes through those cold, stone halls. You see her tiny hand barely able to grasp a nurse's finger, already unknowingly reaching for the comfort that will eventually betray her. You follow her through the tumultuous years of childhood and adolescence, a time when her life should be filled with discovery, but is instead a constant negotiation with pain and expectation. Imagine yourself observing her as a young woman, perhaps in her late teens, standing before a vast, gilt-edged mirror. You see the heavy silks and brocades of her gown, the intricate lace at her collar, the sparkle of diamonds in her hair, all the accoutrements of royalty. But you also see the faint shadows beneath her eyes, a certain listlessness in her posture. The weight of the crown, even before it rests upon her head, is already immense. Every action, every word, every gesture is scrutinized. She is a pawn in a vast political game, her future marriage a treaty, her children the next generation of power. You can almost feel the stifling pressure, the lack of personal freedom, the constant public performance that is her life. Her childhood was not a joyful romp through sunlit meadows. It was a rigorous education in diplomacy, languages, and courtly etiquette, punctuated by bouts of illness that were still treated with those same potent elixirs. You remember the smell of opium, and you sense it still lingering in the air around her, a constant, insidious companion. Perhaps she suffers from chronic migraines, a common affliction exacerbated by the heavy wigs, tight corsets, and endless hours spent in dimly lit, drafty rooms, poring over dense texts. Or maybe it's the lingering pain from a childhood injury, never fully healed, or the persistent ache of rheumatism, a common complaint even amongst the young in these damp European castles. Whatever the physical ailment, the remedies are always the same, readily available and prescribed without question: laudanum, in its dark, syrupy form, or a simple tincture of opium, often mixed with wine or spirits to make it more palatable. You watch her as she navigates a particularly grueling day. Perhaps it's a formal reception where she must smile and engage with countless nobles, all vying for her attention, all with their own agendas. The tight stays of her corset dig into her ribs, making it difficult to breathe deeply. The heavy jewels on her neck and ears are a constant drag. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, perfumed powders, and the cloying sweetness of exotic spices. She feels a familiar throb behind her eyes, the precursor to a blinding headache that threatens to derail her carefully constructed composure. You see her discreetly signal a lady-in-waiting who slips away for a moment and returns with a small silver vial. With a practiced movement, the queen pours a few drops of the dark liquid into a glass of wine, stirs it with a delicate finger, and sips. You notice the subtle shift in her demeanor. The tension in her shoulders eases. The faint tremor in her hand steadies. Her eyes, though still weary, gain a glassy sheen, a distant quality. She becomes more composed, perhaps even more charming, less burdened by the incessant clamor of court. For a fleeting moment you understand the allure. In a world that offers little true comfort or respite, this liquid promises a temporary reprieve, a soft blanket for her overwrought nerves. It's not just the physical pain it dulls. It's the emotional agony, the crushing weight of expectation, the suffocating isolation that comes with being a queen. She is, after all, fundamentally alone. Who among her courtiers can truly understand the burden she carries? Who can she truly confide in? The opium becomes her only trustworthy confidant, her silent escape. You observe her private chambers later that night. The grand bed, draped in velvet, feels vast and empty. She dismisses her ladies, wanting only the solitude that the drug provides. The candles flicker, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She pours herself another dose, this time perhaps a larger one, savoring the sweet, bitter taste on her tongue. You can almost taste it yourself, acrid and earthy, followed by a warmth spreading through her veins, a numb calm settling over her mind. The constant hum of her anxieties begins to fade, replaced by a hazy, dreamlike tranquility. She is no longer the queen, burdened by state affairs and political intrigue. She is simply a woman, momentarily free from the relentless pressure, adrift on a sea of opium-induced serenity. But you also begin to see the subtle changes, the insidious creep of dependency. Her tolerance grows, requiring ever-increasing doses to achieve the same effect. The periods of clarity become shorter, the craving more insistent. You notice her becoming irritable when her supply is low, a quick temper flaring at trivial perceived slights. Her hands, once steady, might now tremble slightly in the morning until she has her tonic. The shadows under her eyes deepen, a perpetual exhaustion settling upon her. Her once vibrant complexion takes on a sallow hue, a telltale sign of the drug's slow internal corrosion. The crown of thorns, you realize, is not just the burden of leadership, but the relentless internal struggle against a craving she barely understands, a craving that has been cultivated since her infancy. She believes it to be her medicine, her necessity, her secret weapon against a world determined to overwhelm her. You watch helpless as this powerful woman, capable of commanding armies and shaping nations, gradually becomes enslaved by a tiny bottle of dark liquid, her strength slowly siphoned away by the very thing she believes is sustaining her. The opium, once a comfort, is now a silent master, dictating her moods, her energy, her very capacity to rule. You've seen the insidious beginning, the quiet infiltration of opium into a royal life. Now you stand in the Queen's private study years later. The air here is different. It's heavier, cloying not just with the ghost of opium, but with the sharp, acidic tang of alcohol, specifically a potent brandy or perhaps a fortified wine. Your modern sensibilities might recall a dimly lit, smoky bar, but this is a royal chamber, rich with velvet and gilt. Yet the atmosphere is equally oppressive, equally fraught with a different kind of decay. You observe her, no longer the young princess, but a mature monarch. Perhaps she is Empress Catherine the Great, burdened by the immense responsibility of an expanding empire, or Queen Victoria, reeling from the loss of a beloved consort and navigating a complex political landscape. The pressures of her position have intensified. There are wars to be waged, treaties to be signed, court factions to be managed, and the relentless pressure of producing, and then marrying off, heirs. The isolation that began in childhood has only deepened. The higher she ascends, the fewer true confidants she possesses. You watch her at her desk, ostensibly working, but her gaze is often fixed, unfocused, on the heavy crystal decanter that sits just within reach. It's not just opium that offers solace now. The constant pain, both physical and emotional, finds new avenues of temporary relief. Doctors of the era, still limited in their understanding of physiology and pharmacology, often prescribed alcohol as a general tonic, a digestive aid, a sleep aid, or even a painkiller. You recall a time when your own grandmother might have had a nightcap or a digestive. For a queen, surrounded by an abundance of the finest spirits and wines, this medical advice becomes a ready justification for a habit that slowly spirals out of control. You witness a common scenario, a long, exhausting day of audiences and bureaucratic tasks. Her mind feels dull, her nerves frayed. The weight of decisions, each carrying immense consequences for her nation, presses down on her like a physical burden. She reaches for the decanter. You hear the soft clink of glass against glass as she pours herself a generous measure of brandy, perhaps, or a rich, dark port. The smell is immediate, sharp and sweet, cutting through the general mustiness of the room. She sips it slowly at first, then more quickly. You see the immediate effect, the way the alcohol loosens the tight knot of tension in her chest. Her face, previously etched with worry, softens. A faint flush rises to her cheeks. She might even laugh a little, a sound that rings slightly hollow in the vast chamber. For a brief period, the world seems less hostile, the burdens lighter. The voices of her advisors, the demands of her courtiers, the criticisms of her enemies, all become a distant, muffled hum. She feels a sense of warmth spreading through her, a deceptive comfort that promises to chase away the chill of isolation and the gnawing anxiety of her responsibilities. But you also see the insidious progression, far more pronounced now than with the opium alone. The morning after, you observe her with a throbbing headache, a dry mouth, and an overwhelming sense of lethargy. Her hand trembles as she tries to sign a document. Her ladies-in-waiting bring her strong tea, perhaps a broth, but what she truly craves, what her body now demands, is another measure of the potent liquid that offered such deceptive solace the night before. You witness the morning pick-me-up, often disguised as a restorative elixir or a morning cordial. The cycle has begun, deepening its grip. You notice the changes in her physical appearance, more marked than before. Her once clear eyes are now often bloodshot, with a slight puffiness. Her skin, once luminous, now appears coarse and flushed, sometimes broken with small capillaries. Her movements, once regal and deliberate, can sometimes be a little less steady, a slight unsteadiness in her step. Her temper becomes more volatile, sudden outbursts, followed by periods of deep melancholy. Her judgment, you realize with a sinking feeling, is also being subtly compromised. You hear snippets of conversations, whispered amongst her courtiers, about Her Majesty's peculiar humours, or her recent indispositions. They may not grasp the full extent of her dependency, but they sense a shift, a gradual erosion of her sharp intellect and unwavering resolve. You feel the weight of her secret, the profound loneliness of being a queen struggling with a hidden vice. She can command nations, but she cannot command her own body's craving. She can order the execution of traitors, but she cannot conquer the demon within her own decanter. The elixir, once a perceived remedy for her unique pains, has become her ruin, slowly eroding her majesty, her health, and her capacity to truly rule. You see the glint of the crystal decanter reflecting the candle flame, a silent, glittering testament to her private struggle, a constant, tempting presence in her solitary, opulent cage. The power she wields, you understand, is almost meaningless when she is so utterly powerless over herself. You are now intimately familiar with the rhythms of the palace, the subtle shift in light from dawn to dusk, the muted sounds of servants moving through distant corridors, the ever-present chill. You've become adept at reading the unsaid, the glances exchanged between courtiers, the tension in a silence. And what you perceive now with chilling clarity are the whispers, soft, insidious, growing in frequency and volume, that coil around the queen like tendrils of smoke. You observe the court, a microcosm of ambition and treachery. Everyone watches everyone else, their livelihoods, their social standing, even their lives dependent on the monarch's favor. And when the monarch begins to show signs of weakness, of deviation from the expected norm of strength and unwavering resolve, those whispers grow louder. You see them in the darting eyes of a lady-in-waiting who clears away the queen's untouched morning tea, knowing a different kind of tonic is already being consumed. You hear it in the hushed conversations of gentlemen-in-waiting as they discuss Her Majesty's indispositions, her headaches, her fatigue, euphemisms for a deeper, more troubling reality. The Queen's dependency, once a secret held close, has begun to seep into the very fabric of court life. Her schedule, you notice, is now subtly arranged around her needs. Audiences are sometimes delayed, her attendance at state functions sometimes curtailed. There are days when her eyes are too glazed, her speech too slurred, her temper too unpredictable to present herself to foreign dignitaries or important petitioners. You feel the palpable tension in the air on such days, the frantic efforts of her closest advisors to manage the optics, to create plausible excuses for her absence or her unusual demeanor. You witness her increasing isolation, not just as a queen, but as an addict. The genuine affection and concern of some courtiers slowly gives way to a mixture of fear, frustration, and opportunistic manipulation. You see those who seek to gain favor by enabling her habit, by ensuring her medicines are always readily available, by covering for her lapses. They are the ones who profit from her weakened state, gaining influence as her judgment falters. You watch as they bring her another glass of wine, another spoonful of laudanum, their faces a mask of solicitous care, while their minds scheme for their own advancement. The whispers are not just about her physical state, they delve into her character. She lacks resolve, some murmur. Her mind is failing, others suggest, their voices barely above a breath. You hear them discuss the erratic decisions, the sudden changes of policy, the moments of inexplicable rage followed by profound apathy. These are the telltale signs of a mind consumed, not just by the pressures of state, but by the relentless demands of a substance. The once sharp intellect that commanded armies and navigated complex diplomacy is now dulled, its edges softened by the fog of alcohol and opium. You feel the atmosphere of suspicion and distrust that permeates the palace. No one truly knows who to trust, who is loyal, who is merely feeding the Queen's addiction for their own gain. The Queen herself, in her moments of semi-clarity, might feel this keenly, her paranoia exacerbated by her dependency. She might lash out at loyal servants, suspecting them of plotting against her, while unknowingly embracing those who truly seek to undermine her for personal power. You see the fear in the eyes of her most devoted ladies, who witness her private torment but are powerless to intervene. Bound by the rigid etiquette of court and the Queen's own fierce refusal to acknowledge her struggle. The royal physicians, once trusted figures, now find themselves in an impossible position. They are expected to cure her ailments, but their very prescriptions have contributed to her current state. Some might try to reduce her doses to suggest alternative remedies, but they are often met with the Queen's royal wrath. her insistence that these medicines are essential for her well-being. You can almost hear her desperate plea, thinly veiled in regal command. "I must have it. It is the only thing that settles my nerves." And so they comply, continuing to supply the very substances that are destroying her, caught between their oath to heal and their absolute obedience to their sovereign. You observe the Queen's daily routine, now a tragic ballet of hiding and seeking. She retreats more and more into her private chambers, away from the prying eyes of the court. The grand state dinners become fewer, her appearances at public ceremonies more infrequent. When she does appear, you notice the carefully applied cosmetics, the stiff posture, the effort it takes to project an image of strength and serenity that is far from her inner reality. But even the most skilled artistry cannot conceal the vacant stare, the slight tremor, the faint, yet persistent, odor of spirits that clings to her person. The whispers continue, evolving from speculation to a quiet certainty. The powerful queen, once a symbol of her nation's might and stability, is slowly, irrevocably descending into the depths of obsession. And you realize with a heavy heart that in this gilded cage, surrounded by sycophants and power-hungry schemers, there is no intervention, no rehabilitation, no escape. Only the slow, tragic unraveling of a monarch consumed by her secret. You stand in the heart of the palace, amidst unparalleled grandeur. Gilded ceilings soar above you, adorned with intricate frescoes depicting heroic battles and mythological scenes. Crystal chandeliers sparkle, reflecting the light of countless candles. The floors are polished marble, strewn with impossibly rich Persian rugs. Tapestries, woven with threads of gold and silver, depict historical triumphs, concealing the rough stone walls beneath. Every surface, every object speaks of immense wealth and undisputed power. But you, the silent observer, perceive this opulence not as a symbol of freedom or comfort, but as an elaborate, inescapable prison. Consider the paradox. A queen who commands millions, whose word can send armies to war or bring peace to nations, yet who is utterly bound by her own unseen chains. You imagine yourself in her shoes, surrounded by this lavish display, yet feeling a profound sense of confinement. Her movements are constantly observed, her choices dictated by protocol and expectation. She cannot simply walk out of the palace gates, mingle with her subjects, or seek solace in anonymity. Every action she takes is a performance, every interaction a political maneuver. The demands of her role are relentless. You perceive the sheer volume of paperwork that crosses her desk. Petitions, reports, diplomatic dispatches, financial accounts. Decisions must be made, often with incomplete information and under immense time pressure. The fate of entire regions, the lives of thousands rest on her judgment. You feel the crushing weight of that responsibility, a burden far greater than any you've ever known in your own comfortable life. And it's this immense, unyielding pressure, coupled with the profound isolation, that makes the elixir so tempting, so seemingly necessary. You watch her as she presides over a state council. She sits on a throne, elevated above her advisors, her face a mask of regal composure. But beneath the surface, you sense the exhaustion, the tremor in her hands that she struggles to conceal by gripping the arms of her throne. Her mind, you know, is not as sharp as it should be. The clarity that is essential for effective governance is clouded by the lingering effects of the previous night's indulgence, or by the creeping anxiety of the next dose. You see her eyes darting towards a closed cabinet, where she knows her solace resides, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture of longing that only you, the unseen observer, can truly discern. The servants, you notice, are not just staff. They are part of the surveillance system of the court. Every personal maid, every valet, every chef, every guard, all are aware of the Queen's routines, her habits, her increasingly erratic behavior. Some are genuinely loyal, but others are spies, their allegiances often divided between the queen and rival factions within the court, or even foreign powers. Her private moments are never truly private. You can almost feel the walls listening, the tapestries breathing in her secrets. How terrifying it must be to live under such constant scrutiny, where even your most personal struggles are fodder for rumor and political maneuvering. The very luxuries that surround her become part of her trap. The finest wines and spirits from across the globe are at her disposal, presented on silver trays, poured into exquisite crystal. The opium, imported from distant lands, is considered a valuable commodity, easily obtained through the vast network of royal suppliers. There is no shortage, no restriction, no intervention. Unlike an ordinary person, she cannot simply be cut off from her supply. Her wealth and power ensure a constant, unrestricted flow of the very substances that are slowly consuming her. You realize that in this specific historical context, her royal status, far from protecting her, actually amplifies her vulnerability to addiction. You also recognize the profound loneliness of her situation.
She cannot seek help.
To admit to such a weakness, to show such vulnerability, would be an unthinkable act for a monarch in her position. It would be perceived as a catastrophic failure of character, a sign of her unfitness to rule, a political weapon for her enemies. The era lacks any understanding of addiction as a disease. It is seen as a moral failing, a lack of self-control. So she suffers in silence, isolated in her golden cage, her addiction a secret she guards with a fierceness born of desperation and shame. You see her at night, alone in her vast bedchamber, the heavy velvet curtains drawn, the only light from a few flickering candles. She is surrounded by priceless artifacts, by art that is centuries old, by symbols of enduring power. Yet she is utterly alone, save for the silent companionship of her addiction, the warmth of the alcohol, the dreamy haze of the opium. These are her only true companions, the only things that seem to offer genuine comfort in her opulent yet desolate existence. This, you understand, is the true price of power. To be imprisoned by your own magnificence, to be consumed by your secret vices, all while projecting an image of unyielding strength to the world that watches, always watches. From beyond the gilded bars of your royal cage, you're no longer merely an observer. You feel a chilling proximity to her secret, a palpable sense of the shame and desperation that clings to the queen like a shroud beneath her robes of state. Focus your gaze on a specific object, a small, exquisitely crafted bottle, perhaps of deep emerald glass, stoppered with a silver filigree cap. It sits, usually hidden, perhaps tucked away in a velvet pouch within her voluminous skirts, or concealed beneath a pile of letters on her private writing desk. This isn't just any container. It is her confessional, her tormentor, her fleeting salvation, a sovereign secret shame embodied in glass. You understand that for a queen, the concept of a secret is almost an oxymoron. Every aspect of her life is public, her body a vessel for the state, her emotions a tool of diplomacy. Yet this bottle holds the one truth she cannot, dare not reveal. Inside, it likely contains a potent solution, laudanum, pure opium dissolved in alcohol, a common remedy of the era, but in her hands, a source of escalating dependency. The distinctive, sickly, sweet and bitter scent, once a vague presence, now seems to emanate from her person. Subtle to the untrained nose, but for you a constant. Telltale sign, you witness the rituals surrounding this bottle. It's never openly displayed, never casually handled. She fetches it herself, always, or instructs her most trusted, deeply compromised lady-in-waiting to retrieve it with the utmost discretion. You see the furtive glances, the quick movements, the way her hand trembles slightly as she uncorks it. It's not a grand public gesture of power, but a small, clandestine act, laden with fear and desperate need. Each time she uses it, you feel the tension in the air, the fear of discovery, the thrill of impending relief. Imagine her in the midst of a demanding social gathering. The ballroom is ablaze with light, music swells, and hundreds of eyes are on her, awaiting her royal grace, her witty remark, her approving nod. But you notice the way her smile doesn't quite reach her eyes, the stiffness in her posture that isn't entirely due to the corset. Her mind, you perceive, is already elsewhere, calculating the precise moment she can slip away, even for a few precious minutes, to seek solace from the emerald bottle. You feel the physical discomfort she endures, the incessant chattering, the heavy perfumes, the oppressive heat of the room, all amplified by her craving, making the prospect of escape almost unbearable. You follow her as she retreats to a small, private antechamber, perhaps under the guise of needing to refresh her toilette. Her lady-in-waiting stands guard at the door, her face impassive, trained not to see, not to hear. Once inside, the Queen's composure crumbles. You see the raw need in her eyes, the desperate haste of her movements. With trembling hands, she pours a measure from the emerald bottle into a small silver spoon or a delicate porcelain cup. You sense the intense focus, the singular purpose that consumes her in this moment. The world outside, with its endless demands and political complexities, shrinks to nothing but the dark, viscous liquid shimmering in the candlelight. As she swallows, you almost taste the bitter sweetness on your own tongue. You then witness the gradual transformation, the tension easing from her shoulders, the lines of worry smoothing from her brow, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. For a brief, precious window she is calm, perhaps even content. The pain, both physical and emotional, recedes into a hazy background. She is no longer a queen burdened by the weight of an empire, but a woman momentarily free from her internal prison. This, you realize, is the devastating cycle, the constant pressure of her life leading to the craving, the temporary relief, and then the inevitable return to the growing shame and deepening dependency. The shame, you understand, is multifaceted. It's the shame of losing control, of failing in her duty to herself and her kingdom. It's the shame of hypocrisy, of projecting an image of unshakable authority while secretly crumbling. It's the constant fear of exposure, of her greatest vulnerability becoming public knowledge, which would shatter her carefully constructed regal persona and potentially destabilize her reign. You see it etched in the subtle lines around her mouth, in the quick defensive glances she casts, in the way she avoids eye contact when she knows her eyes betray her. The emerald bottle becomes her shadow, her constant companion, always present even when unseen. It dictates her moods, her schedule, her capacity to engage with the world. You understand the true tragedy here, a woman of immense power, reduced to furtive, desperate acts in her own palace, enslaved by a substance she initially believed was her salvation. The cold, hard reality is that her wealth and status, far from offering protection, simply ensure that her addiction can flourish unchecked, nurtured by an abundance of supply and a court too fearful or too opportunistic to intervene. You feel the weight of this secret, the oppressive silence it creates, and the profound, isolating shame that traps a queen within her own gilded cage, the emerald bottle her only, tragic, confidant. You have been a silent witness to the subtle erosion, the gradual deepening of her dependency. Now you observe a more profound shift, a visible unraveling that even the most meticulous cosmetic arts and courtly euphemisms can no longer entirely conceal. The veil of decorum, of regal composure, is thinning, occasionally tearing, revealing the raw, exposed nerves of a queen consumed. Imagine her in her private chambers, not as the Grand Monarch, but as a woman in distress. Her elaborate wig has been removed, revealing thin, perhaps even brittle hair. Her face, usually powdered and rouged to perfection, is now bare, revealing the true pallor of her skin, the sunken eyes, the network of broken capillaries, the telltale signs of sustained indulgence. You notice the slight tremor in her hands, even when at rest, a persistent vibration that seems to betray her inner turmoil. The air in the room, you realize, carries a heavier scent now. Not just the faint traces of opium or brandy, but a mustiness, perhaps a faint odor of neglect. You observe her declining engagement with her duties. Once, she would spend hours poring over state papers, her mind sharp and incisive. Now, she might stare blankly at the documents, her eyes failing to focus, her thoughts wandering into the hazy fog of her addiction. Important decisions are delayed, deferred, or made impulsively, often with disastrous consequences that reverberate through the kingdom. You hear the growing frustration in the hushed tones of her most loyal ministers, their efforts to guide her increasingly futile against the tide of her clouded judgment. Her once sharp wit, a powerful tool in courtly politics, has become dull. Her responses slow and sometimes inappropriate. You witness moments where she struggles to follow complex arguments or forgets details she was just told. Her memory, once formidable, is now patchy, making her prone to repeating herself or asking the same questions multiple times. This isn't just a sign of aging. It's the accelerated decay wrought by the constant presence of intoxicants in her system. You feel a profound pity, watching a mind that once commanded an empire slowly lose its grip, piece by agonizing piece. The unraveling extends to her emotional state. You observe sudden, violent swings in mood.
One moment, she might be weeping inconsolably over a minor perceived slight. The next, she erupts in a furious rage at a servant for a trivial mistake.
Her patience, once legendary, has vanished entirely. She isolates herself more and more, preferring the solitary company of her substances to the demands of human interaction. The grand dinners become agony for her, the small talk unbearable. She might retreat mid-meal, leaving her stunned guests and frustrated courtiers to speculate. You perceive the growing alarm among those closest to her, her personal physicians, her most loyal ladies-in-waiting, perhaps even a concerned family member who dares to broach the subject. But their efforts are met with denial, with furious accusations, with the unshakable conviction that she is simply unwell or exhausted. You hear her insist, with a terrifying certainty, that her medicines are the only thing keeping her alive, the only thing allowing her to bear the unbearable weight of her crown. The addict's logic, you realize, is a powerful and destructive force, warping reality to protect the source of its fleeting comfort. Her physical health, too, shows marked deterioration. Chronic coughs rack her body, her digestion is perpetually upset, her sleep is fitful and rarely restorative. You note the lingering smell of perspiration and stale perfumes, an indication of her decreasing attention to personal hygiene. The once regal queen, famed for her elegance, is now showing signs of neglect, a disinterest in the very things that once defined her public persona. The exquisite gowns hang more loosely on her shrinking frame, or, conversely, feel tighter as her body swells with fluid retention. The veil that once concealed her human frailties is now tattered. You see her stumble occasionally, her steps less steady. Her speech at times is slurred, her words imprecise. The whispers in the palace have given way to more open, though still careful, concern. The stability of the realm itself is now at risk, dependent on a monarch whose capacity to rule is visibly failing. You feel the collective anxiety of the court, the underlying fear that their powerful queen is not just ill, but slowly, inexorably, losing herself to a force they cannot comprehend or control. As you watch her, perhaps late at night, alone in her vast, cold bedchamber, you see the profound tragedy. This is a woman who was born into unimaginable power, groomed for greatness, yet utterly undone by a silent, invisible enemy. The grandeur of her surroundings, the wealth of her kingdom, the might of her armies, none of it can protect her from this internal decay. You witness the final, agonizing stages of a queen's unraveling, a testament to the brutal, unforgiving grip of addiction, even on those who sit upon the highest thrones. The light of her reign, once so bright, is now dimming, flickering towards a tragic, inevitable end. You've seen the queen's unraveling, the thinning veil that once protected her image. Now you witness the chilling response of the court, not compassion, not intervention, but a calculated, ruthless exploitation of her weakness. The whispers have crystallized into intent, the subtle manipulations hardened into overt power plays. You are in the heart of a political game, played with human lives and a nation's destiny as stakes, and the Queen's addiction is the most potent card in the deck. Imagine yourself observing a clandestine meeting in a dimly lit antechamber, far from the Queen's ears. Powerful nobles, ambitious ministers, perhaps even a disgruntled family member, huddled together. Their voices are low, their expressions grim, but their eyes gleam with a predatory focus. You hear them discuss Her Majesty's condition, not with genuine concern, but as a strategic opening, a flaw in the fortress they can breach. They dissect her latest erratic decision, her most recent public faux pas, not as symptoms of illness, but as proof of her incapacity to rule, a justification for their own ambitions. You understand the cold logic at play. In an absolute monarchy, the power of the sovereign is paramount. But if the sovereign is perceived as weak, as unfit, a vacuum is created, and nature abhors a vacuum. These courtiers, ambitious and cunning, see their chance. They are not merely observing her decline, they are actively facilitating it, subtly at first, then more overtly. You witness how they ensure her comforts are always supplied, how they remove anyone who might genuinely attempt to curtail her access to alcohol or opium. A loyal physician who suggests reducing her dosage might suddenly find himself banished from court, replaced by one more amenable to the desires of the powerful faction. You see how they use her addiction as a political tool. When a decree is issued that serves their interests, even if it is ill-advised or harmful to the kingdom, they ensure it is presented to her during a moment of heightened intoxication or profound withdrawal, when her judgment is most compromised and her resistance weakest. You watch as they flatter her, appealing to her insecurities, gently nudging her towards decisions that benefit their own agendas, all while subtly reinforcing her need for the substances that numb her. Your Majesty has had a trying day, one might purr, offering a goblet of wine. This will surely ease your noble mind. You perceive the subtle ways they isolate her further. They filter the information that reaches her, ensuring she hears only what they want her to hear, shielding her from dissenting opinions or inconvenient truths. They control access to her, allowing only those who serve their agenda to have private audiences. She becomes a puppet, a figurehead whose royal seal they can affix to documents that consolidate their power, all while she drifts in an opioid haze or an alcoholic stupor. The conspiracy extends to managing her public image. When she must appear in public, they meticulously prepare her, using skilled artists to mask the ravages of her addiction, scripting her responses, and ensuring her appearances are brief and carefully controlled. They spread rumors to deflect from her true condition, blaming her melancholy humors or a recurring febrile sickness. You sense the collective effort to maintain the illusion of a strong monarch, even as the real queen slowly disintegrates behind the veil of courtly artifice. You feel the chilling amorality of it all. These are men and women of immense privilege and supposed loyalty, yet they are willing to sacrifice their queen and potentially their nation for their own advancement. Their ambition eclipses any sense of duty or humanity. You watch as they exchange knowing glances when the queen slurs a word or stares vacantly during a presentation, not with sadness, but with a quiet satisfaction, seeing their plan unfold perfectly. You realize the profound tragedy for the queen herself. In her moments of dim lucidity, she might sense the treachery around her, the way her own court is circling like vultures. The paranoia that often accompanies addiction is heightened by the very real danger posed by her loyal advisors. But her weakened state, her dependence, leaves her powerless to fight back. She is trapped, her authority slowly usurped, her kingdom slipping from her grasp, all while the very people sworn to serve her hasten her decline for their own gain. This is the ultimate price of absolute power, coupled with devastating addiction. The individual succumbs, but so too does the body politic. You witness the insidious, corroding influence of personal vice on national governance, the way a private battle can become a public catastrophe. The courtiers, in their pursuit of power, are not just exploiting a queen. They are dangerously destabilizing the very foundation of the realm, building their own fortunes on the ruins of her broken will.
And you, the unseen observer, can only watch as the queen's life,
And perhaps her empire spirals into the abyss, hastened by the ruthless hands of those closest to her. You travel further east, perhaps to the glittering yet still cold courts of Russia or the Habsburg Empire, to witness another powerful woman succumbing to the gentle tyranny of the emerald bottle. This time, you stand in the chambers of an empress, a woman whose name resonates with power and influence, whose portrait now hangs in prestigious galleries, depicting a figure of resolute strength. Yet, you are about to see the reality behind the painted smiles and regal poses, the empress and her laudanum lullaby. Imagine Empress Maria Theresa, burdened by a vast multi-ethnic empire and numerous children,
struggling with chronic illness and the crushing weight of responsibility.
Or perhaps you see Catherine the Great, whose brilliant intellect grappled with philosophy and statecraft, but whose private life was often fraught with personal struggles and loneliness. Whatever her specific identity, you understand that her daily life, despite its opulence, is a relentless cycle of physical discomfort and mental strain. There's no escaping the endemic diseases of the era, the poor dental health, the digestive complaints exacerbated by rich court diets, the sheer physical toll of childbearing in an age without modern obstetrics. You observe her at a quiet moment, perhaps after a grueling day of receiving ambassadors and presiding over military councils. The weight of her elaborate coiffure, the stiffness of her jeweled gown, the sheer volume of voices and demands she has absorbed, all contribute to a profound weariness. You notice the deep lines etched around her eyes, not just from age, but from chronic pain and lack of restorative sleep. The vast bedchamber, with its heavy drapes and towering canopy, feels more like a mausoleum than a place of rest. You watch as her trusted lady-in-waiting approaches, not with a tray of refreshments, but with a small, discreet silver box. From it, she extracts a tiny, dark glass bottle and a spoon. You immediately recognize the familiar, sweet, cloying aroma of opium, but this time it's laudanum, a highly concentrated tincture known for its potency and ease of administration. This is not some crude folk remedy. It's a widely accepted medicine prescribed by the most esteemed physicians of the era, lauded for its ability to soothe nerves, alleviate pain, and induce sleep. For an empress, constantly under pressure, constantly in pain, it's presented as a godsend. You see the ritual unfold. The empress, with a sigh that seems to carry the weight of her entire empire, takes the spoon. The dark, viscous liquid glistens under the soft candlelight. She swallows it with a practiced ease, perhaps chasing it with a sip of water or cordial to mask the bitter aftertaste. You perceive the immediate, almost imperceptible easing of her tension. Her shoulders relax. The grim set of her jaw softens. The frantic thoughts that once raced through her mind, debating policy and intrigue, begin to slow, to blur, to recede into a gentle, fuzzy haze. This is her lullaby, Not a gentle song sung by a loving mother, but a chemical embrace, a powerful narcotic that promises oblivion from the relentless demands of her exalted life. You feel the seduction of it, the profound relief it offers from pain, anxiety, and the terrifying loneliness of being the ultimate decision-maker. In the silence of her chambers, the laudanum grants her a fleeting, artificial peace, a temporary escape from the crown that is both her glory and her burden. But you also see the escalating cost. Her sleep, induced by the laudanum, is heavy and unnatural, not truly restorative. She wakes groggy, her mind still clouded, her body sluggish. You notice the increasing difficulty she has in rousing herself in the mornings, the constant need for refreshments, often strong tea or coffee, sometimes discreetly laced with a lesser dose of spirits to shake off the lingering stupor. Her mornings become a battle against the withdrawal, the dull ache, the persistent fatigue, until another dose can be administered. You perceive the subtle changes in her personality and reign. Her renowned decisiveness sometimes gives way to procrastination, her legendary energy to periods of profound lethargy. The grand visions she once held for her empire might still be articulated, but the practical, sustained effort required to execute them dwindles. Her courtiers learn to operate around her periods of reduced capacity, sometimes exploiting them, sometimes simply compensating for them, creating an almost unspoken agreement to maintain the illusion of a fully functioning monarch. The lullaby has become a constant companion, a necessary evil. She depends on it not just for sleep, but to manage her pain, to soothe her nerves, to cope with the sheer, overwhelming pressure of her life. You see her reaching for the bottle not just at night, but during the day, discreetly, when the demands of her role become too much to bear. The dosage increases over time as her body builds a tolerance, requiring more and more of the potent liquid to achieve the same effect. You witness the profound isolation of this dependency. Who can an empress confide in about her secret struggle? To admit to such a reliance would be a catastrophic weakness, an invitation for political rivals to undermine her authority. So she suffers alone, her secret tightly guarded, her public image maintained through sheer force of will and the complicity of a few trusted, yet compromised, individuals. As you observe her finally falling into that laudanum-induced sleep, her face peaceful but unnaturally still, you realize the tragic irony. She governs millions, commands vast armies, yet her own body and mind are governed by a few drops of dark liquid. The laudanum lullaby, intended to bring her peace, has instead woven a tangled web of dependency, slowly suffocating the very strength and brilliance that once defined her as an empress. You feel the chill of the vast bedchamber, the oppressive weight of the crown, and the quiet despair of a powerful woman consumed by her secret solace. You are transported to an era often romanticized in history books, a golden age of art, philosophy, and scientific discovery. Think of the Enlightenment courts of France or the Georgian era in Britain, where intellectual salons flourished and refined culture reigned supreme. Yet you are about to peer beneath the glittering surface, to discover the dark underbelly of this enlightened period, a reality where even the most elegant queens were entangled in the insidious grip of addiction, often disguised as genteel habit or sophisticated remedy. Imagine the lavish balls you've seen in period dramas. You are there, amongst the swirling silks and powdered wigs, the air thick with perfume and the strains of a string quartet. But you also notice the rich, heavy aromas of the era's culinary delights, often washed down with prodigious quantities of wine, port, and brandy. Alcohol, far from being stigmatized, is an omnipresent part of social life, a mark of hospitality and refinement. For a queen, access to the finest vintages and spirits is unlimited, a natural extension of her immense wealth and status. You observe the queen, a figure of exquisite beauty and intellect, engaging in witty conversation. effortlessly navigating the complex social dances of the court. She sips from a delicate stemmed glass, perhaps a claret or a sweet Madeira, but you notice how frequently her glass is refilled, how effortlessly she consumes quantities that would leave an ordinary person reeling. This isn't binge drinking as you might understand it. It's a sustained high-level consumption woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. The lack of clean drinking water in many urban centers also meant that fermented beverages were often safer, a contributing factor to normalized alcohol consumption across all social strata. The physical discomforts of the era persist, even for royalty. You recall the Queen's chronic migraines, the digestive upsets from rich foods, the general aches and pains from ill-fitting clothing and draughty palaces. And for these, the enlightened medicine of the day still often turned to opium. You see it subtly presented not just as a medical prescription, but as a fashionable tincture or a sophisticated elixir. A delicate porcelain box might contain tiny, gilded pills of opium and belladonna presented as a headache remedy. A silver decanter might hold an elegant, sleeping draught of laudanum, artfully labeled. You realize that in this golden age, addiction often wore the cloak of respectability. It wasn't a hidden shame for many. It was simply part of the accepted medical and social landscape. The concept of dependency, or addiction as a disease, was still centuries away from being understood. These substances were seen as beneficial, as tools to manage the discomforts of existence. And for a queen, whose very existence was a performance under constant scrutiny, the allure of anything that could dull the sharp edges of reality was immense. You witness her daily routine, not as a rapid descent, but as a slow, deliberate immersion. Her morning chocolate might be fortified with a dash of brandy to warm the blood. Her midday meal would certainly include wine. And as evening falls and the pressures of court mount, the frequency and potency of her remedies increase. You sense the delicate balance she tries to maintain, enough to dull the pain and anxiety, but not so much as to visibly impair her during public appearances. But this balance is precarious, always threatening to tip. You notice the subtle signs visible beneath the layers of powder and rouge. Her eyes, though bright in public, sometimes carry a distant, unfocused glaze. Her skin, once luminous, might show a faint, unnatural flush or a sallow pallor. Her hands, when at rest, might betray a slight tremor. Her natural vivacity might be replaced by periods of profound ennui or uncharacteristic irritability. These aren't seen as signs of addiction, but rather as aristocratic melancholy or nervous humors, symptoms befitting a delicate, sensitive queen. The intellectual pursuits of the golden age, ironically, might even fuel her dependency. The pressure to be witty, learned, and engaging in intellectual discussions could lead to increased anxiety, which then requires more soothing tonics. You perceive the internal struggle, the desire to maintain her sharp intellect and perform her duties, clashing with the growing pull of the substances that promise temporary escape but ultimately dull her mind. You feel the profound tragedy of this era. Despite all its advancements, its emphasis on reason and enlightenment, it remained blind to the devastating potential of these readily available substances. For the Queen, it's not just a personal failing, it's a systemic vulnerability. She is a product of her time, immersed in a culture that unwittingly cultivates dependency. Her strength, her intellect, her very essence as a powerful ruler are slowly being consumed by habits that are socially sanctioned, medically prescribed,
and relentlessly available. As you step back from this glittering yet flawed golden age,
you realize that the most beautiful facades often hide the darkest truths. The Queen, adorned in her finest silks, holding court with philosophers and poets, might outwardly embody the pinnacle of her era's achievements. But beneath that veneer of sophistication, she is fighting a silent, losing battle, her mind slowly eroded by the very comforts that her enlightened age so readily provided. The golden shimmer of her reign, you understand, conceals a deeply personal, internal darkness, the tragic price of a society's ignorance and a monarch's unwavering pain. You have witnessed the slow seep of dependency, the escalating habit, the silent shame. Now you observe a more terrifying transformation, a descent that transcends mere physical decline and steps into the chilling realm of mental unraveling. For some queens, the relentless tyranny of the tincture, whether opium-based or strong alcohol, pushed them from the brink of dependency to the precipice of madness, their majesty replaced by genuine mental anguish. Imagine the grand halls of the palace, once echoing with the queen's authoritative voice, now filled with an eerie silence, or worse, with the sounds of her frantic, disoriented cries. You feel the palpable shift in the atmosphere, from controlled courtly intrigue to genuine fear and profound unease. The queen's behavior is no longer merely erratic. It has become genuinely alarming, terrifying to her inner circle. You witness moments of profound confusion and disorientation. She might speak to people who aren't there, or mistake her loyal lady-in-waiting for a long-dead relative. Her grasp on reality, once firm, has become tenuous, slipping in and out like a tide on a distant shore. You see her eyes, once sharp and commanding, now wide with terror or clouded with a vacant stare, reflecting an internal landscape that has become utterly alien. This isn't just a foggy mind. It's a mind actively hallucinating, experiencing delusions, wrestling with phantoms only she can perceive. The physical tremors, once subtle, are now pronounced, racking her entire body. She might pace endlessly, unable to find rest, driven by an invisible torment. Her speech becomes garbled, disjointed, her thoughts jumping from one unrelated subject to another. You hear her utter strange prophecies or express paranoid delusions about plots against her. Not the calculated political paranoia of a shrewd monarch, but the genuine terror of a mind under siege. The line between reality and the drug-induced nightmare has completely blurred. You understand that this is the extreme end of addiction, exacerbated by the lack of modern medical understanding. The chronic poisoning of her system by potent narcotics or alcohol has taken its toll, not just on her organs, but on her very brain chemistry. The withdrawal symptoms when she is denied her dose are excruciating and terrifying. Convulsions, delirium tremens, profound psychosis. To escape this agony, she demands more, fueling the cycle further, driving her deeper into the abyss of mental derangement. You observe the desperate efforts of her court to manage this catastrophe. The whispers have ceased. Now there is only hushed, terrified consultation. The physicians, once her enablers, are now helpless witnesses trying vainly to mitigate the damage with more ineffective remedies, or simply to keep her alive. The palace, once a hub of political power, becomes a kind of asylum, its grand chambers now prison cells for a queen whose mind has fractured. Her attendants move with extreme caution, their faces pale, their movements guarded. You see the fear in their eyes when the queen's gaze lands on them, when she addresses them by the wrong name or launches into an incoherent tirade. The majesty, the regal aura that once surrounded her has been utterly stripped away, replaced by the raw, vulnerable, and often terrifying spectacle of mental illness. She is no longer a queen. She is a patient, confined and controlled, a tragic shadow of her former self. You feel the profound pity for her. This is not a choice. It is the brutal, inevitable consequence of an illness that went unchecked, unseen, and misunderstood for decades. She was born into a world that offered her potent poisons as remedies, and her position ensured an endless supply. Now in her madness, she embodies the ultimate price of that historical ignorance and personal tragedy. She is trapped not just in her palace, but within her own shattered mind, perpetually lost in a labyrinth of drug-induced terror and confusion. The thought of her once commanding armies, signing treaties, influencing the course of history, now reduced to this state, is jarring. You reflect on the fragility of the human mind, even one as powerful as hers, when subjected to such relentless chemical assault. The crown, once a symbol of her authority, is now a cruel irony resting on the head of a woman who is no longer truly present, whose reign has effectively ended even if she still breathes, as you bear witness to this final, tragic descent from majesty to madness. You understand the true tyranny of the tincture. It promised solace, it offered escape, but ultimately it delivered only a devastating, irreversible ruin, leaving behind a broken queen in a silent, terrified palace. The grandeur that surrounds her now serves only to amplify the profound tragedy of her mental collapse, a stark reminder of the brutal power of addiction to strip away everything, even the very essence of self, from even the most powerful of monarchs. You are no longer focused solely on the Queen's personal suffering, but on the profound ripple effect her unraveling has on the kingdom she ostensibly rules. The throne, that gilded seat of power, now projects an empty gaze, its authority diminished, its direction lost. You are witnessing a nation, perhaps an entire empire, slowly drifting rudderless as its sovereign succumbs to her private torment. Imagine the state chambers, where once decisions were made with precision and authority. Now you perceive a sense of paralysis, a pervasive inaction. Important state papers pile up unsigned. Petitions from distressed subjects go unanswered. Foreign ambassadors grow frustrated, finding their audiences with the monarch increasingly brief, erratic, or simply cancelled. The machinery of state, designed to revolve around the Queen's will, grinds to a hesitant halt. You observe the courtiers, the ministers, the generals. Their faces are etched with a mixture of anxiety, frustration, and fear. They try to compensate, to take decisions in her name, to keep the administration running. But without the ultimate authority of the crown, their actions are tentative, prone to internal squabbling and external challenge. You feel the deep instability that permeates the political landscape, the sense that anything could shatter the fragile illusion of control. Consider the impact on military affairs. If the Queen's judgment is clouded, if her focus is on her next dose rather than the strategic movements of armies, then the very security of the nation is jeopardized. You might hear whispers of battles lost due to delayed orders, or diplomatic blunders that lead to costly wars. The soldiers on the front lines, the sailors at sea, are still fighting and dying in her name, but the guiding hand from the throne is weak, uncertain, or entirely absent. You realize the devastating consequence of her addiction extends far beyond her personal pain, directly impacting the lives and fates of millions of her subjects. Economically, the kingdom also suffers. Without a clear and decisive monarch, reforms are stalled, trade agreements fall through, and the overall confidence in the government erodes. You might see the consequences in the streets of the capital, merchants struggling, industries stagnating, the general population murmuring with discontent. The grandeur of the palace, you reflect, stands in stark contrast to the growing hardship outside its walls, a direct result of the throne's empty gaze. The succession, too, becomes a source of intense anxiety and political maneuvering. If the Queen is clearly incapacitated, questions arise about who will rule next. This leads to factions forming, each backing a different potential heir or regent, creating a dangerous climate of civil unrest and potential conflict. You sense the ambitions simmering beneath the surface of courtly etiquette, the ruthless jockeying for position as the Queen's power wanes. The kingdom, already adrift, faces the additional peril of a contested succession. You observe the Queen in her diminished capacity. She might still sit on the throne for ceremonial occasions, a silent, almost doll-like figure, propped up by advisors, her vacant eyes staring out at her subjects. The majesty is gone, replaced by a hollow shell. Her public appearances become carefully choreographed charades, designed to maintain a semblance of stability, but you, the unseen observer, see through the facade. You know the truth. The power has drained from her, and from the throne she occupies. You feel the profound sense of hopelessness that settles over the palace and, by extension, the kingdom. The grand dreams of her reign, the ambitions she once held for her people, are slowly dissolving into the fog of her addiction. The symbol of national unity and strength, the monarch, has become a symbol of stagnation and decline. The very foundations of governance are shaking, and there is no one strong enough or perhaps brave enough to truly steer the ship. This is the ultimate tragic ripple effect of a queen's addiction. It's not just her personal tragedy, it's a national one. You recognize that in an era where power was so heavily centralized, the failure of the individual at the top could cascade into catastrophe for an entire society. The opulence of the palace, the wealth of the kingdom, the vastness of the empire, all are rendered vulnerable, all are threatened by the hidden, corrosive power of a sovereign's uncontrolled vice. The throne with its empty gaze reflects a kingdom adrift, awaiting an uncertain, potentially perilous
future. You are drawn into the private chambers of the Queen once more.
But this time, the atmosphere is different. It's quieter, heavier, permeated by a profound, almost oppressive silence. The sounds that echo here are not of courtly intrigue or political machinations, but the subtle, haunting whispers of a queen's absolute solitude, a solitude intensified by the isolating grip of her addiction. Imagine her in a vast bedchamber, perhaps on a cold winter's night. The fire in the hearth barely crackles, and outside, snow blankets the ground, muffling all external sound. The only light comes from a single, sputtering candle, casting long, dancing shadows that seem to stretch into infinity. You feel the profound emptiness of the space, the oppressive weight of the silence. She is alone, utterly and completely. You hear the sounds she hears. The rhythmic ticking of a forgotten clock, a faint gust of wind whistling through a crack in the window, the soft rustle of her own heavy silks as she shifts in her chair. But mostly, you hear the echoes of her own thoughts, the relentless, often tormenting, internal dialogue that fills the vacuum of her life. These are the thoughts that rush in when the numbing effects of her substance begin to wane, the anxieties, the regrets, the profound sense of loneliness you perceive, the physical manifestations of her isolation. She might be seated by the fire, staring into the flickering flames, her gaze vacant, her posture slumped. There's no book in her hand, no tapestry she's working on, no letter she's composing. There is only the stillness, the quiet despair of a woman who has withdrawn from the world, and whose world has, in turn, withdrawn from her. The Grand Chamber, once a stage for royal life, has become a desolate theatre for one. The solitude is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a consequence of her addiction. Her erratic behavior, her unpredictable moods, her growing disinterest in social engagement have driven away all but the most obsequious or opportunistic courtiers. On the other hand, it's a condition that fuels her addiction. The crushing weight of being utterly alone, of having no one to truly confide in, no genuine companionship, drives her back to the only solace she knows, the numbing embrace of opium or alcohol. You realize that the lack of authentic human connection is a critical component of her descent. You remember your own moments of loneliness, perhaps a quiet evening at home, but you are always just a call or a text away from connection. For her, in this historical context, there is no such immediate recourse. Even her ladies-in-waiting, her family, her ministers, All are separated from her by the impenetrable wall of her royal status and her hidden vice. Who could truly understand her burden? Who would dare to offer genuine, unvarnished comfort or intervention? The answer, you realize, is heartbreaking. No one. You listen to the subtle sounds of her breathing, sometimes ragged, sometimes shallow, betraying the physical toll her addiction has taken. You might hear a small, involuntary sigh escape her lips, a sound laden with unspeakable sorrow. Perhaps she coughs, a deep, rattling sound that seems to echo in the vast emptiness of the room. These are the sounds of a body slowly failing, a spirit slowly breaking, in the profound isolation of her self-imposed, chemically sustained prison. The absence of genuine human voice, of laughter, of comforting conversation, weighs heavily in the chamber. You contrast this with your own life, where human connection is so readily available. For her, even if she desired it, the social strictures, the political dangers, and her own profound shame make true connection almost impossible. Her royal privilege, which provides every material comfort, simultaneously erects an insurmountable barrier against the very emotional solace she so desperately needs. As you stand in this silent, echoing chamber, you understand that the Queen's addiction has not only stolen her health and her mind, but it has also robbed her of the fundamental human need for connection. She is surrounded by opulence, by history, by the symbols of her immense power, yet she is utterly bereft. The only voices that truly reach her, the only comfort she genuinely perceives, are the false promises whispered by the substances that have become her sole companions. The echoes in these chambers are not just the sounds of solitude, but the silent screams of a soul imprisoned, forgotten and utterly consumed. You feel it now, the crushing, almost physical weight that settled upon these queens' shoulders, a burden so immense it would break an ordinary person. This isn't just the stress of a demanding job. It is the weight of the world, the fate of millions, the very future of a dynasty resting precariously on one woman's decisions. And in this context, you understand with a chilling clarity why the comfort of the cup, whether filled with opium or wine, became such an irresistible,
insidious refuge. Imagine her in the early hours of the morning.
before the court awakens, before the demands begin. You see her hunched over her writing desk, not with the clear-eyed determination of a leader, but with the weary slump of someone already defeated by the day that hasn't even begun. The candlelight flickers across a stack of diplomatic dispatches, each one a potential crisis, a rebellion brewing in a distant province, a treacherous alliance forming on her borders, a famine threatening to decimate a vital region. You can almost feel the cold dread that grips her, the overwhelming sense of responsibility that threatens to suffocate her. There is no modern executive coach, no therapist, no stress management seminar. There are no clear lines of delegation where she can truly offload the highest stakes decisions. She is the ultimate authority, and the buck stops with her, always. You feel the isolation of that position, the terrifying knowledge that every choice she makes could lead to prosperity or ruin, peace or war, life or death for countless subjects. How do you cope with that kind of constant existential pressure day in and day out for decades? You watch her hand reach, almost instinctively, for the small, ornate goblet or the discreet silver flask. It's early, far too early for public consumption, but for her it's not social, it's medicinal. She pours herself a measure of brandy, perhaps, or adds a few drops of laudanum to her morning tea. You observe the practiced movement, the swift, almost desperate gulp, the sharp, burning sensation of the alcohol, or the bitter sweetness of the opium is followed by a deceptive warmth, a subtle easing of the knot in her stomach, a softening of the sharp edges of her anxiety. This is the comfort of the cup, you realize. It's not a joyful indulgence, but a functional necessity, a desperate coping mechanism in a world that offers few others. It allows her to face the pile of daunting dispatches, to endure the endless audiences, to sit through the tedious ceremonies, to maintain the facade of composure when her internal world is crumbling under the weight of her responsibilities. For a brief, precious while, the crushing burden seems lighter, the problems less insurmountable, the loneliness less acute, but you also see the insidious feedback loop. The comfort is temporary, fleeting. The problems, unaddressed or poorly handled, only multiply. The clarity needed for effective governance is dulled. The very substances that provide temporary relief ultimately exacerbate the problems they are meant to solve. You perceive her trying to push through the fog to rally her intellect, but the effort is immense, often futile. The decisions she makes under the influence are frequently flawed, leading to greater crises, which in turn drive her back to the cup for more comfort. You hear her courtiers complain, in hushed tones, about her indecisiveness,
Her erratic judgments, her sudden bursts of temper.
They don't see the woman beneath the crown, struggling under the unbearable weight of her position, finding her only solace in a destructive habit. They only see the effects, the failing monarch, and often interpret it as a personal failing rather than a tragic response to an impossible situation, worsened by the medical ignorance of the age. Consider the physical toll, the chronic headaches, the digestive ailments, the liver damage, the accelerated aging. Her body is screaming under the assault, yet her mind, enslaved by the addiction, continues to demand the comfort that is slowly destroying her. The energy that once drove her reign is now constantly diverted to managing her dependency, to maintaining the delicate balance between function and oblivion. You reflect on your own life. When you are overwhelmed, you might turn to friends, family, entertainment, or even professional help. For these queens, such avenues were either non-existent or politically dangerous. The cup, then, became her sole confidant, her only refuge, her tragic solution to the weight of the world. As you observe her, perhaps late at night, alone with her maps and dispatches and her ever-present goblet, you understand the profound, tragic symbiosis between extreme power and extreme vulnerability. The very position that gave her unparalleled authority also subjected her to unparalleled pressure, leading her down a path of self-destruction masked as self-medication. The comfort of the cup, you realize, was a cruel deception, offering fleeting peace while slowly eroding her kingdom, her body, and her very soul, leaving her forever trapped between the unbearable weight of her world and the seductive, destructive embrace of her chosen solace. You stand at the threshold of history, looking back at the reign of our queen, now concluded, the grand pronouncements of her rule, the splendid monuments erected in her honor, the carefully crafted narratives in history books, all attempt to define her legacy. But you, the silent observer, know the full, unvarnished truth, and you perceive a legacy tarnished, a bitter aftertaste that lingers beneath the surface of official remembrance. Imagine the official portraits. They depict her as majestic, wise, resolute, the very embodiment of royal virtue. Her eyes are clear, her posture commanding, her expression serene. But you remember the reality. The bloodshot eyes, the trembling hands, the periods of vacant staring, the slurred words. The historical record, you realize, is often a carefully curated lie, designed to protect the image of the monarchy and the stability of the state. The true toll of her addiction, her private torment, is meticulously erased or cleverly reinterpreted as illness, melancholy, or overwork. You perceive the subtle ways her addiction impacted her reign, the decisions she made that were influenced by the fog of opium or the haze of alcohol. Perhaps a crucial military campaign was poorly executed due to her indecision, leading to countless lives lost. Maybe a vital treaty was mismanaged, costing her kingdom valuable territory or resources. You hear the whispers of her later years, not just about her infirmities, but about the decline of her administration. the rise of corruption, the general stagnation that settled over the kingdom during her final, drug-addled years. The true legacy, you understand, is not just in the official records, but in the collective memory of the court, the hushed anecdotes passed down through generations of nobles and servants. They remember the erratic behavior, the sudden rages, the forgotten promises. They remember the profound periods of her withdrawal, the fear that permeated the palace when the queen was indisposed. These are the unwritten chapters of history, the bitter aftertaste that lingers long after her elaborate state funeral. You see the impact on her family. Her children, raised under the shadow of her addiction, might bear their own scars. Some might have resented her absence, her emotional volatility, her diminished capacity as a mother. Others might have been drawn into enabling her, becoming complicit in her secret, forced to navigate the treacherous waters of a court ruled by an impaired sovereign. The legacy of her addiction, you realize, extends beyond her own life, poisoning the well of her personal relationships and potentially shaping the psychological landscape of the next generation of royalty. Even her most devoted loyalists, who served her until the end, might carry a deep sense of disillusionment. They witnessed her greatness, her immense potential, but they also witnessed her slow, tragic decline, powerless to stop it. Their loyalty, you recognize, was often tested to its breaking point, forcing them to choose between their duty to the crown and their personal integrity. You feel a profound sense of irony. Here was a woman born to absolute power, destined to shape history, yet ultimately her greatest battle was a private one, fought against an invisible enemy that she could not or would not acknowledge. Her addiction, you understand, was a silent co-ruler of her kingdom, slowly usurping her authority, eroding her intellect, and ultimately diminishing her potential for true greatness. The triumphs of her reign, however numerous, are now subtly overshadowed by the knowledge of her personal tragedy. As you reflect on her finished life, you realize that the grandeur of her title, the might of her empire, cannot erase the truth of her suffering. The legacy tarnished isn't a judgment of her character in the way her contemporaries might have judged her. It's a recognition of the devastating, corrosive power of addiction to diminish even the most powerful of human beings. Her life serves as a stark reminder that even a crown of gold cannot protect one from the internal battles that rage within, especially when ignorance and societal acceptance provide the very fuel for their destructive fires. The bitter aftertaste is the enduring, tragic truth behind the carefully constructed myth of royal infallibility. Segment 16, The Enduring Grip. A modern reflection you've journeyed through centuries, witnessing the secret struggles of Europe's most powerful queens. Now, as you gently drift back to your own time, to the soft glow of your screen and the warmth of your home, you carry with you a profound understanding, a modern reflection on the enduring grip of addiction. The faces, the names, the historical context change, but the core human struggle, you realize, remains terrifyingly constant. Consider the stark contrast between their world and yours. They lived in an era of ignorance, where opium and alcohol were prescribed as panaceas, their addictive properties misunderstood or outright ignored. You live in a world with scientific understanding, with specialized treatments, with open conversations about mental health and substance abuse. Yet despite all this progress, the insidious power of addiction you acknowledge persists. You reflect on the themes that permeated their stories, the crushing weight of responsibility, the profound isolation, the desperate search for solace from pain, both physical and emotional, and the societal pressures that often masked or even enabled their dependency. Do these sound unfamiliar to your modern ears? You realize that while the specific poisons and the societal context have evolved, the underlying human vulnerabilities are timeless. Think about the pressures you face in your own life, or that you see in the lives of those around you. The relentless demands of work, the constant scrutiny of social media, The anxiety of economic uncertainty, the grief of loss, the lingering effects of trauma, these are your modern weights of the world. And just as the queens sought solace in the emerald bottle or the comforting cup, people today often seek escape in substances or behaviors that promise temporary relief but ultimately deliver deeper enslavement. You understand now that addiction is not a moral failing, as it was often perceived in their time, but a complex disease that can ensnare anyone, regardless of their status, wealth, or power. The queens, with their unimaginable privilege, were just as vulnerable, if not more so, than the common folk, precisely because their power gave them unlimited access and their status created an impenetrable wall of secrecy around their suffering. In your world, while access may be different, the internal walls of shame and denial are just as potent. You realize the profound irony that the very things meant to bring them comfort, the medicines of their era, became their ultimate undoing. In your world, you see the constant bombardment of messages about quick fixes, instant gratifications, and the relentless pursuit of escape from discomfort. The methods have changed, but the fundamental human desire to numb pain, to quiet anxiety, to find a momentary reprieve from the relentless pressures of life, remains unchanged. The enduring grip is not just on the individual, but on the systems and societies that surround them. You witnessed how the Queen's court, often out of self-interest or fear, enabled her addiction, blurring the lines between loyalty and complicity. In your world, you observe similar dynamics, where social circles, family units, or even institutions can unwittingly contribute to or perpetuate addictive behaviors, often out of a misguided sense of care or simply a lack of understanding. As you open your eyes and settle back into your modern reality, you carry with you a deeper empathy, a more nuanced understanding of the human condition. The queens, once distant historical figures, now feel profoundly human, their struggles resonating across centuries, their gilded cages, their secret shame, their ultimate unraveling. These are not just stories of the past. They are echoes of an enduring human vulnerability, a stark reminder that beneath the crowns and the power, we are all susceptible to the seductive, destructive whisper of addiction. You understand that while their world lacked the language and the tools for recovery, your world offers hope. But that hope, you realize, can only be realized when the masks are removed, the shame is confronted, and the enduring grip is acknowledged not just in others, but in the subtle ways it may manifest in the fabric of your own modern life. The stories of these queens, then, are not just tragic tales of the past, but powerful, timeless lessons for the present, urging you to look deeper, to understand more, and to remember the enduring strength required to truly be free.